Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Could the Bible be the key to understanding the paranormal? What are transmigrational phenomena and supergeometry? Can there really ever be a scientific definition of the paranormal?
Well, hello there, and welcome to the 309th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I'm Ben, and those mind-bending questions came from my co-host and partner in the paranormal, my dad. But before we welcome our guest, it's time for our good old weekly paranormal contest. So last week, we began 2012 with the question, what is the name of the actual book in which the Mayans make their prediction about 2012?
Well, Matt Harris from Boston was our winner, and his correct answer was the books of the Chilam Balam, which I believe I'm pronouncing correctly, were literally meaning jaguar priest / predictor.
Nice. All right, so this week's question is, in which town in New England does a ghostly leg appear on the gravestone of this town's founder? And if you get that right, win a copy of Behind the Cosmic Veil by tonight's guest.
Thomas P. Fusco was an independent researcher who has devoted nearly 3 decades to investigating the relationship between mind, physics, spirituality, parapsychology, scientific anomalies, and paranormal phenomena with the goal of, quote, uncovering the unifying cosmological framework that has eluded mankind for generations, unquote. He has appeared on numerous radio programs and is the author of Behind the Cosmic Veil, a new vision of reality merging science, the spiritual, and the supernatural, book Ben just mentioned. His website is www.cosmicveil, that's cosmicveil.com.
So Tom Fusco, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
How you doing, guys?
Okay,
not too bad.
Turn up just a bit of the audio, he'll be just nice and clear. Okay, so Ben, take it away.
All right, Tom, what is your new vision of reality, and how is it different from the old vision?
25 words or less, please. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Oh, my. Well, this new vision of reality, of course, seeks to answer the causes behind many anomalous phenomena that we observe in our universe today. Of course, you know I've spent a lot of time working on the body of anomalous data that we call paranormal phenomena. But this model of the universe also addresses certain key problems that the scientific community are still facing in trying to decipher the way our universe is put together.
Okay.
So what are those key problems?
Well, of course, with paranormal phenomena, and let's say some of the mysteries or the quandaries of quantum physics, what we have is that we're observing what science would call non-local causality or non-locality.
Gotcha, yeah.
That we have many observations where we see a physical effect which physically interacts with its surroundings, but we have no direct physical cause connected to it. One author, which I like very much, how he put it, he said, it's like getting a black eye in Miami from a punch that's thrown in Cleveland. And so these are the kind of mysteries that we're looking at. The paranormal, of course, pretty much everything in that qualifies under there. But also things like quantum entanglement, the two-slit experiment in physics, the duality of light, and a number of other aspects of physical anomalies for which we have no explanation.
Yeah, the Lane aspect experiment. It's funny, I can see where we differ already in some of our work. However, you're the guest, so Ben, continue, please.
Okay, so what convinced you that the Bible has some kind of role in this?
Well, what I did was this. My understanding, according to my understanding, that there is a body of information that exists outside of space-time. This is not a new idea in and of itself. It's gone by many names over the centuries. But the Bible itself has a definition of that, too. It's called the wisdom of God, and in the New Testament it's called the Word of God. More recent definitions of it David Bohm, one of the most prominent physicists of the 20th century, called it implicate order, a collection of information outside of space-time from which explicate order arose, which is our dimensional space-time that we experience in a normal way. And so one of the aspects of that is that the human mind apparently has the ability to access that body of information. One of the evidences being is that we sometimes get inspirations that turn out to be hard reality without any of the scientific testing process that leads to those conclusions. So assuming that the Bible is an inspirational work and says very specific things about the way the universe is put together, what I did was take a look at the particular cosmology that's described in there and see if it gives us any inspirational facts.
Okay, and you're talking essentially about this non-locality, this body of information that's non-local. Is that analogous to the collective unconscious that Jung would talk about?
Well, I'm not sure
same sort of idea,
what meant about the collective unconscious. We run into problems, as you know, in this field and all the related fields.
A lot of problems in this field. Yeah.
We've been forced almost to every individual almost comes up with their own set of terminologies because we really don't have a common terminology base. So I'm not sure what the collective unconsciousness, what you mean by that.
Well, it's a common, in psychology, the works of Carl Jung, who was a student of Freud's and decided Freud was full of baloney, at least partially, and as many of us believe. And he said that there is a sort of a non-local body of information, much as you describe. And that's what I'm referring to.
Sounds like one of the alternative names for what I was talking about.
Yeah, exactly. That was it. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So I'm sorry, Ben, you had one more question, I guess.
Where was I? Are you working with other researchers? Is there any kind of peer review here?
Well, one of the things that we're working on right now is testable predictions. And, of course, one of the things that's different about my particular theory when it from other theories that incorporate spiritual elements in it is that my theory actually makes testable predictions about observations that we will see in the universe. So one of the testable predictions that we're going to find is that we're going to find gravitational fluctuations in the immediate vicinity of paranormal events. And I'm working with Mark Hayes of the Pennsylvania Paranormal Association to begin to develop technology that will make these tests.
Okay, let's back up a little bit, Tom. Okay, 1974, I'm investigating a case in Bridgeport, Connecticut, with Ed and Lorraine Warren and a priest named Father Bill Charbonneau.
Okay.
This is the Bridgeport poltergeist thing. Maybe you've heard of it. It's pretty well known. Mm-hmm. I get hit in the leg by a flying television set, and I almost have to go to the hospital. The thing did not fall off a shelf. It was a floor model television. The thing went over and with such force I can't believe the thing wasn't in smithereens. Or I'm standing there 2 days before that watching in the presence of police and fire officials a refrigerator pick itself up and float around the kitchen. What caused that in your paradigm?
Well, these are very good examples, guys, because you know that what we're looking at in these kind of events is that we see no structures, physical structures that actually can generate or direct that kind of physical force. And so, of course, in my model, there is a way to manipulate the physical from the pre-physical or the super-physical. In other words, the super-physical is primary reality. And the physical that we experience is the after effect of reality. So, for example, in my model, it shows that the gravitational lensing, the bending of space that surrounds all objects, can be manipulated superphysically.
Okay. And in Einstein's sense of curved space and time.
Yes, that's a very important point.
Okay.
Einstein's model of a unified field.
I've run into that right between my eyes too.
Wait, didn't they just disprove that, or am I thinking of something else?
No. There's some debate now about whether things can travel faster than light.
Ah, right.
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
that's what I get mixed up with.
It's remarkable how many times and in how many unexpected areas where physics continues to verify Einstein's model.
All right, so I get attacked by a television set, and what can you be more specific about how that works in your paradigm?
Well, yeah. Let's
You're talking about distant effects, distant physical effects. I think is what you're talking about.
Well, here's a model I commonly use. If you can imagine this, imagine a bowl of water, and the water's filled to the top, and the water represents the superphysical elements that I talk of: form and substance, information, and pre-physical waves. And then let's stretch a sheet of rubber across the top of it. And imagine that the rubber is filled with millions of little holes that is able to allow water to seep through it very easily, but you can't see those holes. And when we look at this fabric from above, we see like a blank plane. It's like the empty fabric of space with no matter in it. Now, if you stuck your finger in it, suddenly the water would rush in from underneath, and we would actually see a materialization within the depression of space-time that's being caused by your finger. Now, imagine taking that finger and sliding it across, and the manifestation of water would follow it. And so we would have movement of physical matter without needing the physical energy from the physical side that would normally be necessary to do it. It'd be almost like scrolling through your tiles on your tablet, PC.
All right. So who hit me with the TV set? Was it a conscious entity, or was it just the Hutchison effect or something?
Well, as you know from my work, what I try to do is make a distinction. As I look at paranormal events as a crime scene, and I try to make a distinction between the criminologist and the forensic examiner.
Mm-hmm.
The criminologist is the one that can answer those kinds of questions. What entity was involved? What intelligence was involved? And clearly these kinds of things indicate intelligence. I'm on the forensic side. I want to study and explain to people what the actual physics of the crime scene is. So when a person comes to me and says, is it possible that this could have been an entity of this and that? I can show them the forensics and say, according to the forensics, yes, that theory is viable.
Okay, Tom, let's take it from the viewpoint of a crime scene. Now, Ben, you've studied forensics. Maybe you have a comment on here.
Basic forensics,
yeah.
Nothing really major.
When you look at a crime scene, you look at the whole context of the case, as we try to do in paranormal research. And I started out in the early 70s with ghost research, quote unquote, right? Mm-hmm. And you look at the entire context of the case, and naturally one goes in and doesn't just look at isolated phenomena. You look at, okay, who were the people involved in the case? What could the motives have been? What sort of person could have perpetrated this crime? What is the evidence? What does it mean? How does it fit together? It's not a matter of just separate pieces. It's a matter of putting it together, as you know. So looking at this case we've been discussing, this poltergeist case, I also experienced a number of entities that we could see coming down the hallway of this house, attacking me physically. I had a physical altercation with one of them. It got around me and threw the child across the room. The child, standard parapsychology would say, was the agent, but I don't buy any of that. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, they didn't seem to be the physical cause didn't seem to be very far away from us at the time. And my interpretation of the quantum physics of that situation is somewhat different, perhaps, from your own. What say you?
Well, just to mention real briefly about the criminologist forensist, the forensist truly is involved in the physics of the case. The criminologist is the one that takes that information and tries to piece it together with whodunit.
Okay.
But in what you're talking about with that type of experience, the key element of that I want to point out is that these entities, what you saw, when you saw these things, that's a physical effect In other words, you can't see that thing unless it's interacting with the environment and photons are reflecting off of it. That's
Right.
a real physical effect. It can't touch you unless it's
Well, it
creating
sure
a
did.
real physical cause. And so you experienced all those things. The only exception is that these are paranormal because there was no physical being. In other words, there's no body that you could drag into a lab like a Bigfoot. You have all these physical effects, and you have absolutely no physical cause.
I'm not so sure about that. I mean, just now I have sat in classrooms for decades like everybody else, although I was studying theology, philosophy, and psychology, and my applying that to the paranormal and what I've learned about physics since then has been simply from being in the trenches, experiencing this stuff. I have no advanced degree in physics.
Sure.
So this is how I have interpreted it over the last 40 years, and this is how it seems to have worked. And again, I could be wrong. Ben and I are the first ones to admit that we could be wrong. We get kind of frustrated, as I'm sure you do, with what we refer to as the feral ghost hunters or the garden variety investigators who really don't have any qualifications whatsoever and go in and everybody accepts them as experts. That's really frustrating to me.
Yeah, and with that and the way that they look at those, the type of events that they're observing, you and I think, are in very strong agreement about that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, but I don't know, the physical effects that I have seen seem to be very imminent and present. I understand what you're saying, and you could very well be right. Are you familiar with the Hutchison effect? As familiar as one can be with such a thing.
Well, I have to admit I've come across it in my studies, but it doesn't come to memory right off the top of my head.
Well, it was funny. It was the first thing I thought of because it was only just being worked on in the early 70s, and it wasn't well known. I thought of it when I saw that refrigerator pick itself up and the pictures flying off the wall. And people to this day will often say to me, well, the ghost did this, or the ghost moved this chair. I said, well, it might not be the quote-unquote ghost at all. It might be the effect of the energies that allowed the thing to manifest, as we believe, through the membranes of parallel worlds. We believe all this is sort of the MWI of quantum mechanics, the multiple worlds interpretation. That's what we see. And again, it could be wrong. How do you see, why did we see these entities as we did? Sort of gauzy, yellowish structures. Because if you're looking out, the analogy I always use, if you're looking out your living room window through a curtain, your neighbor comes over, you're not going to see your neighbor. You're going to see like kind of a gauzy structure kind of guy walking by your window. Mm-hmm. And that's the sort of thing that I think of it as being, and that has played out. But of course, the bell curve in quantum mechanics, things tend to resemble what you believe they are. So maybe we're wrong. But I don't know. But your theory is intriguing, so let's talk more about it. What exactly? I'm still trying to get my mind around how you would interpret, say, a classic ghost. The lady who comes down the stairs, walks through the door without opening it every other Wednesday at 8 o'clock. That sort of thing.
Uh-huh. Well, as far as the apparition itself, what we're obviously looking at is an organized collection of information that is materializing in our space-time. It is materializing. We know that because it actually interacts with its environment. If it didn't reflect photons from its surface, we wouldn't be able to see it. As far as its structure and shape, we're talking about a body of information which is sufficiently coherent to reproduce all the details in geometric fidelity of the original woman who may have been walking there maybe centuries ago, and that this information, as it materializes, is recognizable. And so the idea here is that that information is stored superphysically outside of space-time, where time and space has very little effect on it, and that there is a way to materialize that information so that we can see it visibly and actually interact with it. Now, as far as the evidence is for both information and influential force being applied on our universe from outside of it, as far as the information, and the perfect example is quantum entanglement.
Okay. Could you explain a bit about that?
Absolutely. This is where we have a photon that, through repeated attempts, scientists are able, on occasion, to split these in two. The resulting pair is each kind of individual of the pair acts as a full photon, but on a lower energy level, and they take on a polarity. So particle A has an upspin, particle B has a downspin. Then they split these pairs apart and have each individual flying away from each other at the speed of light, since they're photons.
Mm-hmm.
Then they pass particle A through a polarizing field that reverses its spin. Particle B will automatically respond by reversing its own spin, thereby reestablishing the balance within the correlated pair. And this can happen even if these particles are separated by 500,000 light years.
That's right, yeah.
Which makes it absolutely impossible that information could be being transmitted from particle A to particle B that in a physical way.
So it's outside the known realm of space-time when it comes to these two particles, or probably anything else for that matter. Oh, no, I see what you mean.
So, with David Bohm's implicate order, it's like a network. It's a matrix of information. In his picture, it propagates holographically, and so these particles are actually connected, and the information is transferred from one to the other, but outside of space-time. Now, as far as forces being applied from outside of space-time, Theodore Kaluza, who worked with Einstein on his mathematics for his unified field theory, finally concluded that gravity was a non-local phenomenon. In other words, gravitational effect was being caused by some sort of a source outside of space-time. So we look out into space today, and we see all this gravitational lensing with no adjacent physical matter. Now, the atheistic materialistic physicists have made up this imaginary substance called dark matter to explain that there's something there that we can't see. But it's not universally accepted. There is a faction in physics that says, yes, this bending of space is extra-physical. And therefore, that bending of space is a real force that can contribute to explaining some of the things that you guys experienced in this house that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let me just step back a minute and define a term for people who are listening who may not know what it is. The term non-local frequently crops up in physics. And to give you an example of it, there is a certain belief among physicists that human memory, all our memories, aren't non-local. They're not inside of us. They're shared outside of us in a sort of a collection of knowledge and facts and memory and imagination, if you will, much like I would suggest that Tom was describing earlier in the show. So just the term non-local is very important, I think. So
absolutely, and that quantum entanglement, that function that I talked about with the two divided photons, what physicists call a photon teleport, is the evidence of that coherent, meaningful, significant body of information that actually transfers from one particle to the other, but has no physical avenue within space-time to travel.
One of the arguments of quantum physicists is that they'll say, okay, well, they'll agree with us and say, okay, well, all this is true, but on the microscopic level or the subatomic level, all these particles do these things. They defy space-time. They cause things before the effects take place before before the things that cause them. All this business, fantasy takes over. But they might argue that this does not translate to the macroscopic level, the level of people and houses and refrigerators and cops and grasshoppers and all trees and all this business. How would you respond to that criticism?
Well, what we're getting into now is what I call kind of the subtle cultural dogma that dominates physics today. Mm-hmm. And part of that dogma is from the quantist perspective. And the quantist perspective says that none of these things are determinable, that everything is random, and that the problem that they have bringing it up to the macro world has to do with the speed of light and gravity. But anyway, that is the current view. However, it wasn't always held that way. Einstein argued against that. Einstein said that the quantists were wrong. He said that quantum physics is impressive, but I don't believe God rolls dice.
Yeah, that's pretty much what he said, yeah. Because
so
it was too crazy for him, too.
So according to the quantist, it's impossible to tell what the weather in Miami at 2 p.m. is going to be 7 days from now. And Einstein held the opposite view. He said that given enough information, we can absolutely determine what the weather is going to be like in Miami 7 days from now at 2 p.m. So I don't accept, the premise that you were explaining about the quantist view. I don't accept their view. I think they're wrong.
Okay.
And I think they have motivations for doing this other than just pure science.
Well, that's the problem. I want to give Ben a chance here. And I just want to mention that one of the things we do on this show, at least I do, is we're always questioning Western epistemology, how we know what we think we know. And our ultimate conclusion is we don't know anything. Everything you know is wrong is the motto of this show, as you may have seen on the website. So we have a question about, Ben's favorite philosopher, Descartes. For example, je pense donc je suis. He said essentially that I think, therefore I am.
400 years he ruined philosophy.
Well, that's it. But the fact is that even a lot of people, the professor won't tell you that on his deathbed, he essentially, or toward the end of his life, he essentially, recanted on that and said, even that's not good enough. We don't know anything. Thomas Aquinas, all these great thinkers essentially realized that in the end, it all ends in silence. Silence before God, and that's essentially what happened. So, the whether it be the arrogance or the presumption of science is a problem when it comes to honesty in science, and I know you agree from what you've said.
Absolutely, and we have to look at the motivation. For example, if we take a look at the scientific field and we understand what their motives are, science does not get performed without funding. Funding does not get provided without organizations providing that funding. And organizations don't provide that funding unless they're sold correctly.
That's right.
And so this is part of the image. And unfortunately, it contributes to science presenting to the general public certain ideas that are facts, when in fact they're not. My wife just found me a link and said, astrophysicists have just mapped dark matter. And I said, baloney. What they've mapped is all the areas where we see gravity with no adjacent mass. We basically created a map of our own ignorance, and one could easily say what they mapped was the physical manifestation of the hand of God.
All right. Well, you tell them, Tom. We're going to take a commercial break here for just a moment, and we'll be right back on Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and ONWorldwide.com in New England's beautiful but oddly snowless Blackstone River Valley. Stay with us.
Hey, everybody. Lou Mandeville here, your ON 1240 sports director. If you like the best in local sports, as well as what the big boys do each and every night, then tune in to the Morning Fun Show with Mike Sheridan for all your sports action on your station for sports. That's ON 1240.
Okay, and we are back, but I have to give you a little bit of word on Amazon Kindle Fire, this new device that was released in November and was a really great success for sales over the gift-giving season. And, of course, you can get all sorts of things on this little device. It's about $199, and you can get it at Staples and other places as well. And Amazon.com sells it, of course, online. And you can get over 1 million books, newspapers, and magazines, including 4 books of mine, Faces at the Window, Footsteps in the Attic, Turning Home, God, Ghosts, and Human Destiny, and from the historical point of view, Rhode Island, A Genial History, written with dear old Glenn Laxton, formerly of Channel 12 in Providence. And it's a great investment, great gift for any season, and we urge you to check it out. Amazon Kindle and the Amazon Kindle Fire, the newest version of the Kindle device. The Kindle device itself now down to about $79. And we always ask our guests this. Tom, is your book available on Amazon Kindle?
Not yet. It's only in print form only at this time.
Okay, well, we'll keep working on it, and we'll see if we can't get you into the commercial next time. Okay, so
thank you.
Okay, so Amazon Kindle, folks, check it out. Staples and Amazon.com. Okay, well, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM, and we are dealing with a wonderful conversation here with Tom Fusco, author and a great thinker and a person who is really kind of making us think a little bit about our own points of view on the paranormal. Ben and I being voices crying in the wilderness, we sometimes feel, for sanity and a respectable and sort of a humble approach to the mysteries that we see around us. rather than some of the other things you see on TV. Anyway, Tom, let's get back. Ben, did you have any questions before I continue here?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Hey, I did have a comment, if you would.
Please.
According to my understanding of the universe, one of the things that I interpret often with philosophy, as you were saying, many philosophers have said, well, we absolutely know nothing, is that it's a very egocentrical point of view. It's based on a premise that somehow inside of our skin lies a different reality than outside of our skin, that somehow what's inside of us doesn't follow the laws of physics. I've got a cup of coffee sitting on my table right now. The very fact that I can see it and recognize it and reach my hand out and touch it physically and pick it up and not shoot my hand out 3 feet to the left where it isn't shows that we can absolutely know certain things for sure.
Well, the question is, are your 5 physical senses accurate? Can they be trusted?
Well, like any other physical thing, they're going to vary from individual to individual. And the interpretation of what's received by those senses is going to be colored by the knowledge that's in the mind. When the ancients looked up in the sky and saw all the stars, they saw a glass firmament with holes in it, and that's how interpreted it. If you suddenly interjected in their mind the idea of what they were really looking at, they probably would pass out at that moment.
So you are Cartesian. I drink, therefore I am. Coffee, in your case.
Reality has to have some foundation. Otherwise, theories wouldn't work. We couldn't predict the gravitational fields within the solar system and shoot a satellite out there. And funny, the satellite follows exactly the way we say it's going to.
Well, what about the notion that I don't know if you accept the parallel worlds theory. I mean, we live in it ourselves, literally. That the laws of physics seem to vary from reality to reality because all things that can be imagined or postulated are in some sort of concrete existence somewhere in the multiverse. Not all physicists accept that, by the way, as you know.
Sure. And in order to accept it and fully embrace it, one has to take a philosophical standpoint. Because most theories, scientific theories, are based on anomalous observations, hard observations that don't fit in the current model, and then they form theories to try to explain these observations. The multiverse is based on a philosophical premise. And so consequently, you would have to say that philosophy is equal to or greater than physical experience in order to give that theory more credence, so to speak.
Well, that's true in our case with these experiences we've had. Let me just get down to something you said in some of the material you sent us, because regardless of the causes or the physical background here or whatever, the philosophical interpretation of the background, there do seem to be in your world, your paradigm, entities, okay, who are living creatures and who can interact with us in the ways perhaps you've described. So, and if I can, let's see, am I quoting you here or not? It says, space-time can explain the mechanics, but okay. You mentioned regardless of whatever entity, intelligence, or other process might initiate them. So do you believe in entities other than ourselves?
Well, the very idea that organized, coherent groups of information can produce intelligences like ourselves, based on my model, there is every reason to believe that information exists that's intelligent and coherent, but not necessarily physically manifested in our universe.
All right. So when we saw these 4 entities coming down the hallway, well, I interpreted them as parasites, or at the time demons, which we've since come to call parasites because it doesn't have the baggage, because I've never found their theology to be the same as ours. What was I looking at there? What was I fighting with? What was throwing the kid across the room there?
Well, again, what we're looking at are coherent, intelligent forms of information that have been able to at least partially materialize themselves physically, in part through the bending of space.
Have you ever encountered any?
No, not myself personally.
Okay, you might find the experience would certainly deepen your point, your point of view, and I don't know. I sometimes feel the lack of an education in physics can be a problem. But I have education in other areas, and I was studied under some very prominent people in the two different churches who were exorcists and all this business. But anyway, that's so. I'm just wondering what we're getting at here. What is the next step might be? What is the motive behind whatever groups of intelligences we're dealing with here?
Well, you have to understand, and my job that I see it, and my duty to the community is this. I want to stay on the forensics team. It's actually a very safe place to be. But in our field, we have 1,000 criminologists who are worried about who done it and why for every 0.25 forensists. So I'm not going to go in that field and saying, I think this is a demon, and I think this was a ghost, and I think this was a poltergeist. That's not my field of expertise. What I want to do is present those criminologists with the model that says, yes, if you think that these were demonic entities and did all these things, here's my model of the universe. According to that model, yes, Mr. Criminologist, absolutely that could be true.
Okay. I think I understand what you're saying, and I respect it. All right. But one of the problems that we often point out with Western thinking is that it divides everything. It pigeonholes things, and it separates things from one another with the dubious assumption that if we study the parts of something, we can learn about the whole. As many philosophers have pointed out, very often Eastern philosophers, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. My problem with that approach is that I think one does have to take a holistic approach. That's what we try and do, and I don't think it is a difficult, even at times, to do it if you have the big picture in your mind. I mean, maybe the big picture is flawed, maybe it's not complete, but it is big. So I don't know how you would respond to that. I have a problem with dividing rather than assembling things as a means toward knowledge. What say you?
My interpretation of that would be this, is that what you're talking about, according to my picture, would be when you talk about this Western philosophy of picking apart material and trying to divide it up and analyze it that way. It's based on a strictly materialistic view of the universe.
Exactly.
Now, what we're saying, of course, what you've discovered from personal experience and what I've discovered mostly from other people's experiences, is that there is an aspect to reality that is in addition to the material end of it. And so in order to correctly assess reality, I don't necessarily believe in the Eastern philosophy that we should abandon the material in terms of the extra material, but we need to include both.
Okay, well, I can respect that. There are those who say, though, Tom, that, and some of them have been guests on this show, saying that what we're studying in the paranormal is outside of science. It's outside of the paradigm of science, and it certainly cannot be described, let alone defined, by the materialistic science that gave us the scientific method. I think there's a certain amount of validity to that. Maybe you disagree.
I do disagree. It's part of the propaganda dogma of established physics that says, well, this is not scientific. And I'll give you an example.
Okay, well, go ahead.
Because, let's take a look. When we see all the bizarre things that quantists talk about the subatomic world, and they accept it, that this is normal and this is fine, same kinds of things happen in the paranormal, but they're not being pronounced by their own prophets.
Okay.
And so they reject it, and it's intellectually dishonest, and I'll give you a good example. Science has no explanation how life emerged from inanimate matter. But if you take a look at the physics and the principles, not the dogma and the propaganda, but the pure physics of it, no system can have any subset of it that would exceed or work in contradiction to the laws that govern the greater system. What I say is that if you take a deck of cards, you could come up with 1 million different rules and hands, but in the end, everything is dictated by the deck of cards. You're not suddenly going to get a suit of spikes coming out of it. So if that's the case, if life is a subset of the universe, that means that the universe itself must have life embedded in it.
Mm-hmm.
And if the universe can create intelligences like ourselves, that must mean the universe has to be intelligent also. Otherwise, we have a quandary in physics where the universe is creating subsets of itself that exceed its own laws or work in contradiction to it. Now, scientists won't touch this with a 10-foot pole because they want to say, hey, beneath your skin is all your imagination. We don't have to deal with it. They don't have to confront the Einsteinian challenge. God does not roll dice.
Well, don't look now, Tom. I think in a way you're espousing the Eastern thought on much of this, as did Sir Fred Hoyle, the great astronomer, the late great astronomer royal from Britain, when he said that the life is not the exception in the universe; it's the rule, and that it can exist in all sorts of different forms that we don't even think about.
The biggest difference between me and the Eastern philosophies is I'm not going to surrender my steak dinner.
Okay, well. Ben, being a vegetarian, might have some pungent comments on that, but in any case,
anybody that draws a line with an opinion is going to, find people that disagree with it.
I don't care what you put in your body.
Okay, all right. Where does theology enter into this? Where is God in your thinking?
Well, again, if I start from the forensics point of view and start building from the ground up, so to speak, what religion and theology attempts to do in large part is the same thing that science tries to do, and that it tries to explain various observations and experiences that we have. The difference is most religions, cause or look to an extra physical source, something outside of space-time, to explain those things. And real good religions have an order that makes some sort of a sense to our reason, which means that there must be something to them, because our reason is a subset of the physical laws that created the universe. So if our reason recognizes them as coherent and meaningful, there's got to be something to it.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. Although, having studied in an Eastern Orthodox seminary, one of the three seminaries I studied in, there is a point of view of almost the opposite, that God is that all of the physical world and the universe is shot through with the presence of God as one who is conterminous with all space and coexistent with all time. So I don't know if, again, but that's an Eastern Christian approach.
Right.
That you wouldn't hear in a Western seminary.
Right. What a Western Christian approach would say that is that, and this is from, basic Christian theology, is that Jesus Christ is a manifestation of God. He is an extension of God, and through him all things were made, and so everything that's in the universe reflects the order that is in the Word of God, which is an aspect of God.
Well, the trouble with basic theology is that it depends whose basic theology, unfortunately, is sort of degenerated into a babble,
Absolutely. But what we're doing is finding areas of agreement at this moment in time.
Yes, of course.
And so we have one philosophy or religion that may talk about the presence of God ever present in the universe. And I took the Christian aspect of it and say, from a Christian perspective, this understanding of Christianity, in a sense, says the exact same thing.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying. Yeah. In depending on how you look at it. As a matter of fact, my last book, Turning Home, was not really. It was sort of an overview of my philosophy of what I've experienced over the past, probably at that point, 35 years. And I have had particularly Orthodox priests and people who are of theological education coming out of the woodwork, telling me what a great book it was. And that was, I used some of my experience in Orthodox thought in there, because I think it sort of expresses things well. But I had no idea that I was really playing to that audience, so to speak. And I'm glad somebody liked the book. Other people liked it, other people didn't. But I was rather surprised at how. So maybe there is a certain commonality there. But let me ask you this, because we're running out of time here, Tom. I'm going to hate to end this conversation. I'm having a whale of a time here. Having a great time talking to you here. But let me ask you this: what Do you consider yourself as out to prove anything to mainstream science? Because so many people in this field are trying to do that, usually alone.
Well, I take it a very different approach. People normally, are, when they're trying to get into the door, so to speak, they're trying to say, hey, pay attention to me, and this is what I have that's valid. And, science stays in their own house and says, look, we're just not going to go out and play in your particular boxing ring. What I do is a little bit different. I throw down the gauntlet. I say, you know what? I can go into your boxing ring and give you a bloody nose on your own turf with your own laws and rules. And I can make physical predictions on my theory that you could go out and test about the expansion of the early universe, the percentage of gravity that was in the early universe opposed to what it is now. And I challenge them. I say, you come to me. I'm not going to you.
Okay. I see what you mean. Yeah, 'cause I had a similar experience in the 1970s. By the late 70s, I was really confused about what I was dealing with. The old spiritualist explanations for what I was saying just weren't good enough. And I got hit in the nose with a case in which there was a student at the University of Connecticut who at the same time was haunting a house in Maine and ran into the people. It was absolutely astounding. I said, this is not spirits of the dead and all this spiritualist nonsense. So, and at the time I was working, I consider Louisa Rhine to be one of my mentors at the time, and she was, of course, one of certainly the grandmother of modern parapsychology. And she couldn't explain it, and she and her husband Dr. Joseph Rhine, were trying to explain things to modern science, so-called, for decades, and their successors, and for example, the American Society for Psychical Research, who often include eminent psychologists and physicists and people like this, even they couldn't break into this, as you say, the house of science. They just keep the doors locked, and the welcome mat is removed from the front door.
Yeah, well,
even to their own.
I don't want to sound too arrogant, because it might have sounded arrogant, but we know the frustrations that can, arise over years of trying to get people's attention.
Absolutely.
But I'm going to make a prediction right now, and this is a prediction based on my theory. After you get done repeatedly, Mr. Scientific Community, bilking organizations and governments for billions of dollars to build these atom smashers, these colliders, and you still cannot find the Higgs boson, you can't find the graviton, and you can't find the dark matter that are all required for your materialistic view of the universe. When they stop giving you money, look me up, I'll be here.
Very good. Well, on that note, we're going to call it a day here on this fascinating conversation. Tom, it's been absolutely wonderful. Why don't you tell people about your book and your website and where they can find out more about you?
You can find everything, related articles, the blog, listings of where I'm going to appear next, and to buy the book, of course, is at www.cosmicveil, spelled V-E-I-L, cosmicveil.com. It's all there.
Excellent, very good. It's a thick book. I was going to have it in front of me, but somebody hooked it. So anyway,
tell them to buy their own.
You tell them to go buy their own.
Yeah, exactly.
Ben, do you have any further comments or?
It's been wonderful having you on the show, and it's good to have some different perspectives every now and then.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Tom. We'll be in touch off the air.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Tom Fusco, ladies and gentlemen. Cosmic Veil, V-E-I-L, cosmicveil.com. Okay. So, I wanted to give you a bit of a teaser here. How much time do we have there?
We have about 7 minutes.
Okay. Give a bit of a teaser here. We are putting together a show. I don't know if you know this yet, Ben.
What?
But
I probably don't know it.
Okay. Well, this is going to be about people, and I wish I'd like to get Tom's thoughts on some of these things too. Cases of people sort of stumbling into other universes. This has happened. It's happened many times. It's well recorded over many centuries that people somehow will be in one place or time, and then all of a sudden they're in another place or time. So let me just begin to read this. We're going to try to get this lady on the show. This is from a woman, and unfortunately she's in Europe and does not speak English, so we're going to have to work on that. 4 months ago, this is a translation of her personal account of this. 4 months ago, I woke up in a normal morning. I was in my rental house where lived for 7 years. Everything was the same except the set of sheets on my bed was different. Did not give, and she didn't think that was important at the moment. She said that she woke up and she was apparently in bed with her ex-husband, who she had been divorced from for a long time, and yet in this particular world they had never been divorced. Said that her office was in a different location in the building than she remembered, I'm trying to read this, a terrible translation. I got to my office wireless area and I looked and was still working there, but was in another department reporting to a director who I did not even know. I went to the office to mark the directory. I said I was sick and I left. Everything in my portfolio was the same, my cards, my ID, all the same, but I do not remember having changed departments at any time. I went to medical insurance and they tested me for drugs and alcohol. Everything was clean. I went to work the next day and asking, they told me, telling that I did not feel well and that I had been just a bit out of step. My apartment is the same. I have watched all the papers and I keep in the house and everything is the same. Soon I realized that something was wrong and I thought it was some kind of amnesia. Now, of course, this could be explained by obviously some sort of psychological difficulty, but there are mitigating factors in many of these cases. 6 months ago, I'm not with my partner of 7 years. We left and started a relationship with a guy in my neighborhood. I know him well. I've been 4 months with him and know his name, address, where he worked as a child. You have to, and where he was studying. Well, now there is this other guy who suddenly turned up, and everything was messed up. The world was just different. Not completely different, but little things that were just sort of driving her kind of bonkers here. And so we're going to try to pin this down. She has been tested by a number of psychologists. No difficulties of that kind have been found. And it seems to be a matter of a time slip. Now, you might remember the case that I was talking about a couple of weeks ago. It occurred in 1976, before I knew what I thought I think I know now about the multiverse. And this particular, I had to literally talk this, what people thought was a ghost, into his next life, shall I say. He was remembered being in a plane crash, but I was in this attic in Yonkers, New York, sort of dealing with him, and he said he was in a stone church in Virginia. Everything was different than he realized, but at the same time, his memory was changing as he talked to me, so he said. And at the end of the conversation, which took the better part of 3 days, he was completely at home in his new world. People were coming to the door of the church, presumably out of the choir to practice, or his family looking for whatever. And everything was just fine. It was, and that's happened on a couple of occasions that I seem to have caught people when people have reported ghosts in their house or whatever. And you go in and you investigate it from I think a deeper point of view than most people take. You find these really strange circumstances. So perhaps this woman had died, quote unquote, in a parallel life. And what does nature do? You take the path of least resistance. Path of least resistance was to a world very similar to what she had, but somehow her memory stuck with her. And this seems to have been the case. There's also the case we want to get into of the man in the Tokyo airport who appeared in the airport with a passport. He appeared at Japanese customs with a passport from a country that had never existed. He had coins from the currency from this country. He was wearing a fabric. His clothes were made of a fabric that was not known, and et cetera, et cetera. And he eventually, the police, he ran out of the airport. The police set up a huge manhunt for him, never found him. And these things happen with startling frequency. We had the case of the people who wrote into the show, said that they had been traveling. Remember, there was in Arizona, Ben, or New Mexico?
I think it was New Mexico.
Yeah, and they stumbled into a town that they were avid...
they were looking for ghost towns.
Ghost towns, yeah. They were avid fans of ghost towns. And they found not only a ghost town, they found a very prosperous and functioning town where everybody spoke Dutch. All of a sudden, what turned out to be Dutch. They got a lot of strange looks because they were the only ones driving a car that was different from anyone else's. And this was really, really odd, and they never found out any more about it. But parallel world experiences? Well, probably. Okay, that about does it for today then. I want to thank our producer, the lovely Denise Richards, who was here this evening with us. And we'll see you next Monday, January 16th, right here on WON 1240 AM and ONWorldwide.com, when Ben and I will welcome author and researcher Dr. Joseph Mara, who has been researching the multiverse and what it means for us.
So now, after a very interesting perspective, we're back to the one that we usually use on our show. So on our regular CBS edition on Sunday, January 15th, in Boston, Pittsburgh, Detroit, and Seattle, we'll welcome the famed British author, adventurer, and researcher Richard Freeman for Adventures in Cryptozoology.
We leave you this evening with a quote that we often use on the show. It's from the great physicist from Germany, Max Planck, quote, "A scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it." Unquote.
Thanks for sailing with us on our great cosmic journey. We'll see you next time.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.